The splash hit like an insult made physical, ice-cold water flung straight into her face. In an instant, the courtyard outside Buckingham Palace collapsed into stunned silence. The woman in red didn't flinch. Her blonde hair clung to her cheeks beneath the soaked bearskin hat, water trailing down the curve of her jaw, dripping from the sharp edge of her chin. Her blue eyes didn't even blink. She just stood there, soaked, still breathtaking. Then came the sound that changed everything. A single, thunderous bootstep. She stepped down from the raised platform, slowly, deliberately, like a force waking from centuries of stillness. Gasps rippled through the tourists. The TikToker's giggle snapped into a strangled breath. Her grin vanished, leaving behind a face that suddenly understood regret. They thought she was just a statue in makeup. They forgot beauty can stand stronger than steel. Before we show what happened next, tell us where you're watching from, and stay for the moment the crowd truly understood power. The room was still when Corporal Elizabeth Hartley opened her eyes. No alarm needed, no noise to break the ritual. Just the soft rhythm of breath and the quiet discipline of habit forged through years of military precision. It was 5:30 a.m. outside, but inside her flat, time moved the way she allowed it to. Blonde hair tied back, she faced the mirror with the same calm her blue eyes had carried through combat zones and ceremonies alike. The apartment was stripped of decoration, bare walls, folded sheets, nothing out of place. Only one photo disrupted the order. Her, in desert fatigues, standing tall among a squad of male soldiers twice her size. Dust on her boots, fire in her eyes. She inhaled deeply, holding the breath for 5 measured seconds, then exhaled. Her chest rose steadily, shaped not only by strength but by years of carrying what others couldn't. On the dresser, her ceremonial armor waited. Polished boots, scarlet tunic, white gloves laid with surgical precision. As she dressed, her movements were smooth, unhurried, deliberate. A faint scar peeked just beneath her collarbone, partially hidden by the strap of her uniform. It was old, faded, but visible. A reminder of the mission that nearly took her life and the reason she'd never cover it. She wore it like a medal no one could pin. Some men were trained to fight. She was trained to end things without ever lifting a hand. She didn't just wear the Queen's colors. She upheld their weight. And today, she would step once more into a courtyard of noise and selfies and people who didn't know what stood before them. She didn't wear the uniform for applause. She wore it for those who no longer could. Vanessa Clark strutted into Buckingham Palace's courtyard like it was her personal stage, a ring of friends orbiting her, cameras already rolling. 24 years old, oversized hoodie slipping off one shoulder, bleached hair piled high, sunglasses perched despite the cloudy sky. She bounced in excitement, flashing her brightest smile for the live stream. "Let's see if the hot guard chick will flinch," she squealed, spinning dramatically as her followers spammed heart emojis across the screen. Her target stood just ahead, an immovable figure in scarlet and black, rifle perched against her shoulder, blonde hair tucked neatly beneath her towering bearskin hat. Corporal Elizabeth Hartley didn't twitch, didn't blink. She remained the embodiment of polished silence, while Vanessa pranced around her like a clown circling a lion. Vanessa mocked a stiff salute, performed an exaggerated royal curtsy, even blew a kiss directly at Elizabeth's impassive face. The tourists nearby laughed nervously, unsure whether to film or flee. Still, the guard didn't move. Frustration tightened Vanessa's grin into something sharper, meaner. She turned toward her closest friend, whispering just loud enough for the cameras to catch. Bet she's too pretty to do anything if I splash her. Before anyone could react, before even the tourists realized what was happening, Vanessa flung the contents of her iced latte straight at the guard's face. The pale coffee splattered across Elizabeth's uniform and chest, soaking the red wool and dripping down the polished buttons. The courtyard gasped as one. Phones shot upward like a flock of startled birds. A mother yanked her child closer. A man near the front lowered his camera in disbelief. For one frozen moment, the woman in red stood there, soaked, unmoving, untouched by the insult. And then, the beautiful guard finally moved. The water streamed down her uniform in rivulets, tracing the curve of her shoulders, slipping over the shape of her chest, soaking into the brilliant scarlet fabric until it clung to her like a second skin. Drops glistened along the buttons of her tunic, sparkling under the weak afternoon sun. For a long, suspended second, Corporal Elizabeth Hartley remained frozen, her body rigid, her gaze locked far beyond the courtyard's noise. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach up to wipe the dripping water from her face. She stood there, beautiful and immovable, like a queen carved from marble. Then, slowly, methodically, she lowered her rifle. Not with rage, not with violence, but with a quiet, devastating finality that spoke louder than any scream ever could. Her right foot stepped down from the platform. The sole of her boot struck the cobblestone with a sharp, deliberate crack. It echoed across the courtyard like a warning from a different century. The ground beneath the tourists seemed to shudder, the atmosphere thickening, as if the very air realized what had just been unleashed. Vanessa stumbled backward, the blood draining from her face, her cocky smile dissolving into something raw and terrified. She looked small now, silly, like a child who had just pulled the tail of a lion and realized, too late, that it was awake. The crowd forgot to breathe. Mothers shielded their children. Tourists took involuntary steps back. Even the phones, once raised like weapons of mockery, wavered and dipped lower, unsure if it was still safe to film. She didn't yell. She didn't even blink. She just moved. And that was enough. From the edges of the courtyard, security moved swiftly, threading through the frozen crowd. But no one dared speak. No one dared interrupt. Because the guard, the one they had mocked, underestimated, and splashed like a carnival prop, was no longer still. She was awake. And in that terrifying, beautiful stillness, everyone remembered exactly what they were supposed to respect. The clip detonated across the internet like a match dropped into dry brush. Within hours, it flooded TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and news feeds across the globe. By midnight, 23 million views had stacked up like bricks in a monument to her silence. Thousands of stitches spun off the original video, some analyzing her posture, some simply staring in awe. Comment sections burned with disbelief and admiration. She's soaked and still didn't flinch. Who throws water at a combat vet in uniform? That's not a model, that's a soldier. Martial arts experts broke down the footage frame by frame, marveling at the economy of her movement, the perfect centering of her balance even under assault. Veterans recorded reactions with misted eyes, their voices thick with pride as they saluted not her beauty, but her restraint. The palace, usually silent in the wake of public spectacle, issued a rare and deliberate statement. It read simply, discipline, dignity, and strength, unmoved by insult. That is what our guards are made of. No names were mentioned, none needed to be. The world already knew. Meanwhile, Vanessa Clark's glittering online kingdom began to collapse overnight. Sponsorships vanished faster than she could refresh her inbox. Fashion brands pulled endorsements. energy drink companies severed ties. Streaming platforms scrubbed her collaborations from their storefronts. Her face, once a familiar and smug fixture of every major brand collab, disappeared like a mistake no one wanted to admit they had ever supported. And through it all, Elizabeth Hartley remained silent. She didn't need to say a word. The world was already speaking for her. The barracks were unusually still when Corporal Elizabeth Hartley returned, her boots clicking softly against the ancient stone floor. No congratulations, no whispered rumors. Just the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but waited, with respect, with understanding. She made her way down the corridor with the same steady pace she had carried through battlefields and ceremonies alike. When she reached the major's office, she didn't knock. She didn't have to. The door stood slightly ajar, as if the moment had already been waiting for her. Inside, the room was stripped of any unnecessary clutter. A few medals glinted on the walls. A sword rested behind a glass case, and at the center of the massive oak desk sat a single object, a dark velvet envelope, thick and heavy, embossed with the royal insignia. The major didn't say a word. He only lifted his chin once, a silent nod for her to step forward. Elizabeth crossed the room with measured calm. Her gloved fingers brushed over the soft velvet before lifting the envelope. She opened it carefully, as if the very weight of its contents deserved reverence. Inside was a single handwritten note, the ink pressed deep into the paper, with the kind of deliberate force that only true authority could command. You reminded the world that silence can shield a crown. Thank you. Signed simply, Charles R. There was no flowery language, no grand declarations, just the quiet, devastating acknowledgement of a deed done right. Elizabeth folded the letter along its natural crease and slid it into the inside pocket of her tunic, close to her heart. She met the major's gaze only briefly. He didn't speak either. He didn't have to. Some honors didn't require trumpets or medals. Some lived heavier and deeper because they passed in silence. The next day, a discreet car arrived at the barracks. No fanfare, no reporters, no swirling speculation on social media. The driver wore simple black, and the journey to Windsor Castle unfolded under a veil of soft gray clouds. When Elizabeth stepped from the car, she was escorted through quiet halls, past centuries of paintings and history that seemed to lean forward to witness her passing. In a small, sunlit room overlooking a manicured courtyard, a table was set for two. There were no photographers waiting behind hidden doors, no scripts, no waiting aids with notepads and questions, just a simple porcelain tea set and a man who understood what it meant to carry a nation on your back. The king rose as she entered, not as a monarch greeting a subject, but as a soldier honoring another. He was older now, lines deepening around his eyes, but his presence was still sharp, measured, watchful. He gestured for her to sit, and for a moment they simply shared the silence, the way soldiers sometimes do when there are no words adequate enough for what's been witnessed. Finally, he spoke, not with the commanding roar of ceremony, but with the soft certainty of someone who had seen the cost of restraint. "People think beauty weakens a soldier," he said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "You proved them wrong." Elizabeth didn't offer thanks, didn't fill the room with useless noise. She simply nodded once, a graceful tilt of her head that said everything without needing translation. It was stronger than any parade ground salute. It was the gesture of someone who understood that real strength didn't need to announce itself. The king smiled faintly, setting his cup down with a soft clink against the saucer. Outside the window, the clouds began to break, letting in a sliver of sun across the courtyard stones. Neither of them rushed the moment. Neither of them needed to. Some recognitions weren't meant for crowds or cameras. Some were written only into the memory of those strong enough to carry them. And Elizabeth Hartley carried it without a word. Vanessa Clark stared into her camera, but for once she didn't seem to know how to perform. Her usual energy was gone. No ring lights, no staged background, just a bare wall behind her and the raw, uncomfortable hum of a live recording she couldn't control. She pressed her palms together nervously, inhaling sharply before she spoke. "It was just a joke," she stammered, voice cracking under the weight of it. "It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. I didn't think." But even as the words left her lips, she seemed to know they wouldn't matter. The apology came too late. The world had already decided. The palace never released an official condemnation. They didn't need to. Instead, they quietly uploaded one unedited clip. Vanessa's laughter, the arc of iced coffee flung through the air, the water splattering against a woman who didn't so much as blink, and then the slow, devastating step forward. No music, no commentary, just the raw ugliness of what had happened and the unwavering dignity that answered it. Public outrage reignited overnight, stronger and colder than before. Brands rushed to issue curt statements severing their ties. Sponsorships that had taken years to build evaporated in hours. Live stream deals disappeared. Merchandise pre-orders were canceled. Her face, once plastered across energy drinks and clothing lines, was scrubbed from websites like a mistake no one wanted to remember. TikTok moved faster than anyone expected, demonetizing her channel without ceremony, stripping away the final platform she had built her influence on. The comments under her apology spiraled out of control. "You didn't think because you didn't respect anything. You disrespected someone stronger than you'll ever understand. There's a difference between being famous and being remembered, and you chose wrong." A week later, Vanessa returned to her broken page, not with another apology, but with a single, muted photo. She sat on the stone steps of a Royal Guard memorial, dwarfed by the towering bronze figures etched into history behind her. No makeup, no designer clothes, no carefully crafted image left to maintain. Her blonde hair hung limp over her shoulders as she stared down at the ground, hands folded loosely in her lap. No caption accompanied the photo except 6 small, hollow words. Some lines should never be crossed. But it didn't spark a new wave of sympathy. It didn't heal the brand she had shattered with her own hands. Because by then, the world had already moved on, carrying with it the memory of the woman she had tried to humiliate, and the silent lesson taught by one devastating step. And Vanessa Clark, once a name shouted across platforms, was left to sit in the silence she had earned. Buckingham Palace's courtyard was quieter now, not in volume, but in energy. Corporal Elizabeth Hartley stood once more at her post. Same scarlet tunic, same tall bearskin hat, same disciplined stillness. But something had changed. Not in her, but around her. Tourists no longer rushed forward to taunt or test her. They didn't pose mockingly beside her or shout to get a reaction. They watched from a respectful distance, their voices lower, their cameras slower. They came not to provoke, but to witness. And in their faces something Elizabeth hadn't seen before. Reverence. Children pointed, but not with jokes, only awe. A young boy with a sketch pad clutched something in his hand as he approached the gates. His father held him back gently, unsure. But the boy slipped past and placed a folded drawing on the stone ledge, before stepping back quickly. When her shift ended, Elizabeth found it there, crayon lines dancing across the page. A blonde-haired royal guard in a red coat, drawn taller than the palace behind her. Across her shoulders, a golden cape fluttered like flame, and at the bottom, in shaky, determined letters, "Real heroes don't need to move fast." Elizabeth didn't smile. She didn't even glance around to see who had left it. She just folded the paper slowly and slipped it into her pocket, letting her gloved hand rest over it for a moment longer than needed. She didn't need applause. She didn't want headlines. She hadn't moved for glory. She had moved because it was time. Because some insults aren't about pride. They're about the weight of history, about the silence that carries generations of honor, about what happens when the last line of composure is crossed and someone must show the world what restraint truly looks like. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just stepped forward. And in that single, silent step, she reminded the world that stillness isn't weakness, that dignity can be louder than rage, that beauty, when forged by discipline, becomes something unstoppable, not a model, not a statue, not a joke in a red coat, a soldier. Have you ever faced a moment where staying still was your strongest answer? Was Elizabeth right to stand firm, or would you have reacted differently? Tell us below, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who understands that true warriors don't always need to raise their voice.